When I lost my job, I moved in with my son. But on Christmas, he kicked me out. Then, what would you do if the only person left to call family locked you out on Christmas morning? Welcome back, my wonderful family and friends. If you're tuned in and ready to dive into today's story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Tomorrow, I'll be bringing you another exciting story you definitely don't want to miss. So, let's get started. Lucas never imagined his life would shrink to a single suitcase. Just 5 months ago, he'd been the man everyone respected, the kind who arrived early, stayed late, and never missed a shift in 30 years. But when the company downsized, his loyalty was worth less than paper. "We're restructuring," they said. The words felt colder than the snow that would soon blanket the city. At first, Lucas pretended it was temporary. He told his neighbors he was on a short break, and his son, Evan, didn't question it. Evan had his own life, wife, child, a nice suburban home that smelled of cinnamon and new beginnings. When Lucas finally confessed the truth, that he'd lost everything, Evan hesitated before saying, "You can stay with us for a while, Dad, just until you get back on your feet." The first weeks were almost peaceful. Lucas fixed things around the house, made breakfast for his grandson, and watched old Christmas movies with a soft smile. But beneath every kindness lay quiet tension. Evan's wife avoiding eye contact when bills were discussed. Evan's polite reminders that the job market was tough these days. By December, Lucas sensed it. He wasn't family anymore. He was a shadow haunting their perfect life. On Christmas Eve, Lucas spent hours preparing dinner. Roast beef, potatoes, the same meal his late wife used to make. He even set an extra plate at the table for her out of habit. When Evan saw it, his jaw tightened. "Dad, that's weird. Can we just have a normal dinner?" The night soured fast. Evan's voice rose. He said things he couldn't take back. About pride, about responsibility, about being tired of carrying another grown man. Lucas sat silent as his grandson looked on, confused and frightened. By morning, the snow was thick. The lights on the tree still glowed, but the house felt colder than any winter. Lucas stood by the door, suitcase in hand, as Evan's voice cracked between guilt and anger. "I can't do this anymore. You need to go." The words hit harder than any storm. Lucas didn't beg. He didn't shout. He just nodded, slipped on his worn coat, and stepped out into the white silence. The wind stung his face, but it couldn't touch the fire beginning to burn inside. He walked until the houses thinned, until the sound of laughter faded. His boots sank deep into the snow, each step heavier than the last. Somewhere behind him, a child's laughter rang out, a reminder of everything he'd lost. He looked up at the gray sky and whispered, "Merry Christmas, son." The words froze on his lips, brittle as the ice beneath his feet. That night, in a park half buried in snow, Lucas sat beneath a flickering streetlight. He pulled his wallet from his coat and stared at a fading photo of him and Evan, father and son, smiling in better years. He closed his eyes. Something inside him cracked, and something else began to form in its place. It wasn't hate, not yet. It was the first spark of justice, burning quiet and cold. The cold was a cruel teacher. Lucas learned quickly that the streets didn't care about holidays, family, or memories. The snow turned to slush beneath his boots, soaking through his socks as he wandered from shelter to shelter, clutching his suitcase like a lifeline. The first night, he tried to tell himself it was temporary, that Evan would calm down, that pride would thaw and guilt would bring him back. But the phone never rang. Each silent hour was another nail sealing him into the coffin of his old life. By the third night, his fingers trembled too badly to hold the photo of his son. He tore it in half and threw it into the trash. The act didn't bring peace, just a hollow echo that whispered, You deserve this. At the shelter, the air reeked of damp wool and desperation. Men spoke in low voices, trading stories of how they'd lost their homes, their jobs, their families. Lucas stayed silent. He wasn't one of them, at least that's what he told himself. But when he saw his reflection in a cracked bathroom mirror, he saw what the world saw: a man discarded. One evening, he sat by the river watching lights shimmer on the black water. A paper cup of coffee steamed between his hands. Across the street, a family laughed as they carried gifts to their car. He could almost see himself there years ago, lifting Evan onto his shoulders, pretending the boy was flying. That memory stabbed deep. His chest tightened. His breath came fast and shallow. The humiliation, the loss, the silence. It all converged into something sharp, something alive. For the first time since that Christmas morning, Lucas let himself feel it. The rage. He stood, fists clenched. "You threw me away," he whispered, his voice breaking the still air. "You took everything I gave you, and you buried me." The words weren't just for his son. They were for the world that looked past him, the system that rewarded greed over loyalty. That night, Lucas didn't return to the shelter. He walked until dawn, until the city lights dimmed and the sky bled gray. He made a vow. He wouldn't die in the cold. He wouldn't vanish as a nameless failure. He would rise again, and the world would see him. His son would see him. The anger that once poisoned him began to crystallize into purpose. He found work where he could, cleaning, repairing, hauling. Each day hardened his resolve. He saved every coin, every scrap of dignity. But deep down, Lucas knew this wasn't about money. It was about reclaiming himself. And one day, when he had the power, when he had rebuilt from the ashes, they would remember the man they threw out like snow on the pavement. For now he waited, watched, burned quietly. He looked at the sky, at the falling flakes catching faint light, and whispered, "Not yet, but soon." The snow fell thicker, muffling the world into silence. And in that silence, vengeance began to take its first breath. The city forgot him, but Lucas never forgot the sound of the door closing behind him that Christmas morning. It replayed in his dreams, a dull thud that echoed inside his chest. He stopped visiting the shelters. They were full of ghosts who had accepted defeat. Lucas refused to become one. He found work at a repair shop that didn't ask questions and paid in cash. The owner, an old mechanic named Don, saw the quiet fury behind his eyes and didn't pry. "You fix things," Don said once, handing him a wrench. "Maybe start with yourself." Lucas worked until his hands bled, until the noise of clanging metal drowned the whispers in his head. Every bolt tightened was a small victory, a piece of order restored to a life that had lost all structure. At night, he rented a room above the shop. Small, window cracked, the scent of oil clinging to the walls. He ate little, spoke less, and wrote obsessively in a worn leather notebook. The pages filled with thoughts, lists, and one name written over and over: Evan. He wasn't plotting murder or madness. He was plotting proof. Proof that he wasn't the burden his son believed. That he could rebuild from nothing and rise higher than before. Don noticed the way Lucas studied business journals during lunch breaks, how he stayed up after hours watching online lectures on management and finance. "What's the end game, old man?" Don asked one night. Lucas didn't look up from his notes. "Redemption," he said quietly. "And maybe a little justice." Years began to pass, marked not by seasons but by progress. Lucas invested every dollar he could spare into learning. Online courses, certifications, a small side venture repairing electronics. His discipline was ruthless. Every failure only sharpened him further. Still, when Christmas came, he'd catch himself staring out the window at passing families, the glow of trees through apartment glass. His heart tightened, not with longing, but with focus. He would never beg to be let in again. One night, while sorting through discarded circuit boards at the shop, he came across an old photograph wedged in a drawer. A picture of a young man helping his father fix a car. The resemblance made his chest ache. For a brief, dangerous moment, Lucas wanted to throw the photo away, to kill the softness inside him once and for all. But he didn't. He placed it in his wallet, behind his ID, like a wound he wasn't ready to close. Months later, Don died quietly in his sleep. Lucas took over the shop, renaming it Phoenix Repairs. The irony wasn't lost on him. He hired no one. He spoke to few. But behind the glass door, a man who had once been discarded was slowly building a new empire. One forged in silence, isolation, and purpose. Sometimes, late at night, he'd look in the mirror and barely recognize the man staring back. The softness was gone. His eyes were steel. And for the first time since his fall, Lucas smiled. He was no longer broken. He was becoming ready. The years had hardened Lucas into something his son wouldn't recognize. A man of calm movements and deliberate silence. His hair was silver now, his hands calloused but steady. Phoenix Repairs had grown from a back-alley shop into a modest but respected local business. It wasn't wealth that drove him, it was control. For the first time in his life, everything he built belonged entirely to him. One morning, while fixing a client's laptop, Lucas froze at the sight of the company logo that appeared when the screen lit up. Eventech Industries. His son's company. He'd followed Evan's success only distantly, hearing whispers from old colleagues. How his son had built a thriving startup. How he was now a name in the city's business scene. Pride might have surfaced once, but not now. Now it only stoked the quiet fire in Lucas's chest. He researched Evan's company that night. What he found sent a chill through him. Evan's co-founder, a man named Riley Trent, was the kind of businessman who built empires on manipulation and charm. Articles described lawsuits, silent buyouts, and rumors of shady accounting. Evan's face appeared beside Riley's in every photo, smiling. But his eyes, Lucas noticed, were tired. "Like me," Lucas muttered. "Before I learned." He began small. He signed a repair contract with a distribution firm connected to Eventech, using only the name L. Hartman, his mother's maiden name. Over months, Lucas made himself invisible yet indispensable, slowly infiltrating the outer edges of his son's corporate world. He didn't seek confrontation. He sought understanding and leverage. The first move was subtle. A rumor, seeded through a supplier, that one of Riley's key clients was looking for alternatives. The second, a discreet favor to a struggling employee within Eventech, a man Lucas knew would talk when treated kindly. From those whispers, a truth began to unfold. Riley was siphoning money from the company under Evan's nose. Each revelation tightened the knot in Lucas's chest. His vengeance no longer felt like a choice, it felt inevitable. One evening, he attended a business networking event under his new name. The air smelled of cologne and expensive lies. When Evan walked in, shaking hands and laughing, Lucas's breath caught. His son looked older, sharper, harder. The same pride in his step that once drove him to slam a door in his father's face. Their eyes didn't meet. Not yet. Later that night, Lucas slipped a note under Riley Trent's car windshield. "You're bleeding your partner dry. Some debts don't stay buried forever." He watched from the shadows as Riley found it, eyes darting, face pale. It wasn't about exposure yet, it was about fear. Lucas wanted to rattle the cage before tearing it open. Days turned into weeks, and Eventech began to tremble under pressure. Suppliers hesitating, clients pulling back. Evan fought to hold things together, unaware that the quiet storm gathering around him had a familiar heartbeat. Lucas stood in his workshop late one night, staring at the same photograph of him and his son he'd once kept hidden. He placed it beside a small flame, watching the edges curl, but he couldn't bring himself to let it burn. The hunt had begun, but beneath the cold calculation, a question began to whisper louder each day. Was he chasing justice or his son? Lucas had thought he understood the world now. Betrayal, pain, and the intoxicating rush of revenge. Every calculated strike against his son's company felt justified, a poetic symmetry for the cold rejection he had endured years ago. Yet, in the quiet hours of his new life, amid the sterile hum of his penthouse office, a message arrived that shook him to his core. It came from an unexpected source, a former business associate who had watched the chain of events unfold from the shadows. She revealed the truth Lucas had never dared to consider. His son had not acted out of malice. The harsh words, the cruel dismissal, the snow-soaked Christmas morning. It had been manipulation, not hatred. A cunning business partner had convinced his son that Lucas was a liability, a weakness that could jeopardize the company. Every insult, every act of rejection had been fed by another's lies. Lucas felt the floor shift beneath him. Rage still burned in his chest, but it now twisted into something unfamiliar: doubt. Was his son's betrayal real, or had it been the cruel byproduct of someone else's ambition? The fire that had guided his vengeance now flickered. He remembered the boy he had raised, the laughter echoing through the house before judgment seeped in, the warmth of shared mornings now tinged with ice. The memories clawed at him, conflicting with the bitterness that had driven him for years. He walked the empty streets at night, the city's glow reflecting in his eyes. He replayed every moment, every calculated strike against his son's company. Each move now felt heavier, laden with moral ambiguity. Revenge had been satisfying, a way to reclaim dignity. But at what cost? Lucas began to see the truth of his own transformation. He was no longer the man his son had known, nor the man he had once been. He had become a shadow, a force of calculated destruction, fueled by rage that might no longer be entirely justified. And yet, beneath the shadow, a flicker of something else remained, a possibility. If betrayal had been born of deception, not cruelty, could there be redemption? Could justice exist without annihilation? Lucas's hands, once steady in plotting ruin, now shook slightly as he considered the path forward. His son was not inherently evil. The true villains still walked free, masked in smiles and boardroom titles. For the first time in years, Lucas hesitated. His vengeance, so long a compass, now seemed poisoned by uncertainty. The revelation did not erase the hurt. No wound healed that easily, but it reframed it. He realized that to continue blindly, to crush his son without understanding, would be to surrender to the very darkness he had vowed to conquer. Lucas's fury now had a new edge, not the simple fire of revenge, but the sharp clarity of purpose. He would act, but differently. The game would continue, but the rules had changed. Justice, not destruction, would guide him. And somewhere deep inside, he wondered if he could find the one thing he had lost in the snow: the heart of a father willing to forgive. Lucas had spent years cloaked in silence and strategy, a man reborn from pain and vengeance. But the revelation of his son's manipulation had left a strange emptiness, like a wound reopened, not by betrayal, but by understanding. The fire of revenge burned differently now. Sharper, colder, and far more uncertain. He knew he could not continue blindly. It was during one late evening, in a quiet cafe tucked between glass towers, that he ran into her, Elena, a former colleague from his early corporate days. She had always admired Lucas's brilliance, but more importantly, she had known his heart before it was hardened by loss. Recognition flickered in her eyes, and in that instant, Lucas felt something he hadn't in years. A tether to humanity, to a past life where compassion and purpose had guided his actions. Elena did not waste words. She spoke plainly about what she had observed. The traps, the corruption, and the web of deceit surrounding his son's company. But she also spoke of Lucas himself, of the man he had become, brilliant but hollow, capable of ruin yet starved of peace. Her words were a mirror, reflecting both the brilliance and the cost of his vengeance. Together, they began to strategize not for destruction but for exposure. The aim was no longer to crush his son or feed old grudges. It was to reveal the true villains hiding behind the scenes, the ones who had poisoned family and business alike. For the first time in years, Lucas felt his fury transform into purpose, a clarity that did not demand blood or retribution. As they worked, Lucas found himself remembering what it meant to trust another. Elena's insight and courage became both a compass and a restraint. In planning how to expose the corrupt partner, he recognized how close he had come to losing himself entirely to revenge. The long nights spent plotting ruin, the meticulous strikes against his son's empire, they had hollowed him out, leaving only skill and rage. With Elena's guidance, he began to rebuild a version of himself that could wield power without being consumed by it. Yet even as the alliance formed, danger lingered. The forces they planned to expose were ruthless and patient. Lucas realized that to succeed, he might have to risk not just his fortune, but the fragile life he was beginning to rediscover. The life with Elena's friendship, the possibility of reconciliation, and perhaps the faint hope of family restored. The stakes were higher than ever. Victory could bring justice, but failure could destroy everything he had rebuilt. In those quiet hours, Lucas understood a truth he had resisted for years. Revenge was never about the target. It was about the one who wields it. And wielding it without wisdom came at a terrible cost. With Elena at his side, he felt the first real glimmer of balance, of power tempered by conscience. The alliance was not merely a partnership. It was a lifeline back to himself, and to the man he might still become. The path ahead would demand courage, restraint, and sacrifice. Lucas now faced a choice: continue the course of cold vengeance, or embrace a new form of justice, one that could expose corruption without destroying the souls around him. And for the first time, he felt ready to choose wisely. Lucas had come far. He was no longer the shattered man cast into the snow, nor the burning force of vengeance that had silently attacked his son's company. He had purpose, allies, and a plan to expose the corruption that had ruined both his family and the business world. But the deeper he delved, the more he realized that revenge was never a simple path, especially when others' lives hung in the balance. It began subtly: threatening messages, anonymous calls, and subtle sabotage hinted at danger moving closer. Elena, steadfast and resourceful, became the first to sense it. One evening, as they reviewed financial records pointing to the corrupt partner's crimes, a masked figure ambushed her outside their office. She survived, barely, but the message was clear. Those they aimed to expose would not hesitate to strike back. Lucas faced a sudden, brutal choice. He could continue his carefully orchestrated campaign against his son's company, finishing what he had started and securing the personal revenge he had spent years cultivating. Or he could protect Elena, the woman who had reminded him of his humanity, whose life now dangled in the balance. The decision was immediate, instinctive, and agonizing. He chose her. Every carefully plotted strike against his son's empire was abandoned. Every financial maneuver halted. Lucas threw himself into shielding Elena from further harm, confronting threats head-on, often putting himself in danger. In doing so, he sacrificed not just his long-sought revenge, but also the satisfaction of watching his son falter. The man who had once been consumed by pride and fury now understood the weight of love and responsibility. Yet the cost was severe. Lucas's enemies were relentless, and his resources were stretched thin. Every moment spent protecting Elena meant opportunities lost to expose corruption fully. For a brief, gut-wrenching period, he questioned whether justice could ever exist in a world that demanded such impossible choices. He had traded the temporary satisfaction of revenge for the enduring burden of protection. And in that sacrifice, he glimpsed the true moral lesson. Vengeance could bring victory, but only at the expense of one's soul. By choosing to protect rather than destroy, Lucas mirrored the very lesson that had haunted him since Christmas years ago. Love often required loss, and dignity was not won through ruin. In the quiet aftermath of the immediate danger, Lucas sat alone, the city lights casting long shadows across his penthouse floor. The fire of rage had dimmed, replaced by a steadier, heavier flame, one fueled by purpose, empathy, and restraint. He knew that the final confrontation with his son and the corrupt forces still loomed, but he was no longer just a man driven by fury. He had become a man capable of making impossible moral choices, and in that capacity, he discovered a strange, unshakable strength. Lucas's path forward was no longer about punishment. It was about justice, protection, and the possibility of redemption. And though he had sacrificed the sweet satisfaction of revenge, he realized it was a price far worth paying. The day Lucas had long imagined finally arrived, but it was nothing like he had envisioned. It was not a scene of vengeance, with his son crumbling under his calculated blows. Instead, it was quiet, tense, and profoundly human. The office where they met was stark, bathed in the soft winter light that seeped through tall windows, a far cry from the cold snow that had marked their last encounter years ago. His son stood waiting, older, wearier, the arrogance of youth replaced by guilt etched into his features. The air between them was thick with unspoken words, the weight of years pressing down. Lucas had the power to destroy him, to topple the empire that had rejected him, to claim the triumph he had so meticulously prepared. But he hesitated. The fire of revenge that had guided him for years now flickered against the truth he had discovered, against the lessons learned while protecting Elena, against the man he had become. "I know everything," Lucas said finally, his voice calm but unwavering. He laid out the evidence, not only of the corrupt partner's manipulations but of his son's misjudgments. Every lie, every betrayal, every cruel decision that had been influenced by deception was exposed with precision. His son's face paled as the layers of guilt and shame settled in. I didn't know," his son whispered, voice cracking. "I thought I was doing the right thing. I never wanted to hurt you." The words should have been a victory, a chance to unleash years of pent-up rage, to exact justice in the way Lucas had once imagined. But as he looked at the man his son had become, the remorse, the vulnerability, the reflection of his own earlier self, Lucas saw something he hadn't expected: the power of restraint. The true victory lay not in destruction, but in exposing the real villains while sparing the innocent.
Lucas chose silence au vers destruction.
He did not seize control of the company. He did not humiliate his son. Instead, he revealed the corrupt partner's machinations and allowed justice to take its course. The weight of revenge lifted from his shoulders, replaced by the heavier, steadier weight of moral clarity. In that choice, he reclaimed not just dignity but humanity. His son fell to his knees, tears tracing lines down a face hardened by ambition and regret. "I'm sorry," he murmured, over and over. And for the first time, Lucas felt the bitter chill of rejection soften into something warmer, something like forgiveness. Lucas walked away that day, leaving the office and the confrontation behind. The world he had once sought to destroy had been set right, not by vengeance, but by justice tempered with mercy. He understood now that the cost of revenge is always steep, But the cost of restraint, though heavy, carries a far greater reward, the preservation of one's soul. Outside, snow began to fall. Not the bitter snow of abandonment, but gentle flakes, silent and pure. Lucas breathed deeply, letting the weight of the years, the pain, and the choices lift slightly from his chest. The reckoning had been brutal, emotional, and transformative. And though the past could not be undone, he had emerged not broken, not hollow, but whole. Months had passed since the reckoning, yet the memory of that confrontation lingered in Lucas's mind like a scar, visible, permanent, and a reminder of both pain and growth. He had returned to a life less defined by power and more by purpose. The corrupt partner had been exposed, the company stabilized, and his son slowly rebuilding not just the business but himself. Lucas, too, had changed. Revenge had run its course, leaving behind lessons in restraint, morality, and the fragile strength of forgiveness. One quiet morning, Lucas found himself walking the familiar path to his son's home. Snow fell softly, the flakes drifting lazily in the winter light. He paused at the gate, suitcase long abandoned, heart steady but expectant. This was the same threshold where betrayal had once thrown him into despair, where anger and humiliation had frozen him outside in the snow. Yet now he felt no bitterness, only the calm of a man who had survived the storm within himself. The door opened. His son, older, humbler, and infinitely more aware of the fragility of relationships, stood there. There were no harsh words, no recriminations, only the quiet weight of remorse and hope. They looked at each other, two men who had been broken and reshaped by life, separated by pride, yet drawn together by the shared bond of blood and history. Lucas stepped inside. No explanations were necessary. The silence said everything. In that moment, the years of pain, betrayal, and rage seemed to melt into the warmth of understanding. Forgiveness was not loud, nor was it easy. It was quiet, deliberate, and profound. It was a gift both given and earned, a recognition that the wounds of the past need not dictate the future. He watched his son move through the house, a man humbled yet striving, and felt the truth he had always sought. Reconciliation was not a reward of revenge, but a triumph over it. The snow continued to fall outside, soft and indifferent, a reminder that life moved forward regardless of the battles fought within it. Lucas understood now that true power lay not in the destruction of others, but in the courage to restrain oneself, to act with integrity, and to choose love over pride. In the weeks and months that followed, Lucas and his son rebuilt their relationship slowly, brick by brick. They shared meals, quiet conversations, and even laughter, a sound that had once been rare and painful, now a balm for old wounds. Though the scars of betrayal remained, they no longer defined the man Lucas had become. Revenge had exacted its toll, but in its absence, something purer had emerged. Understanding, justice, and the enduring strength of forgiveness. Lucas had faced his anger, confronted his past, and emerged whole, not merely as a survivor, but as a man who had chosen the harder, nobler path. Outside, the snow melted into the promise of spring, and with it, Lucas felt the final weight of vengeance lift from his heart. The storm was over, and though the world remained imperfect, he had found something that neither wealth nor power could ever buy: peace. Thank you so much for watching my story all the way to the end. Your support means everything. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts.